We're going to start in chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to go through the whole book, hopefully. And it's just it's a love story, as we'll see. In so very many ways, it demonstrates God's love for us, even his love just for us as humanity, but also us for his bride. A little bit of context. The book of Ruth takes place during the time of the Judges. If you read the book of Judges, you see it was a very horrible time in Israel. It says that everyone did what was right in his own eyes, and so that's where we are during Ruth. In Israel, it's for the most part, everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes, and it's just a wicked time. But this book also shows us that not everyone in that time is, completely gone away from the Lord. There are some who are actually seeking the Lord. And then finally, it starts off with a famine, and that famine was likely due to God's judgment during the time, of the Judges. Israel would, leave the Lord, and then the Lord would bring a judgment on them, and then they would cry out to the Lord after so long of being under His judgment, and they would cry out to Him, and then He would raise up a judge that would bring them out of that. And so, likely, this famine was part of God's judgment on Israel. So we can start with verse 1. It says, in the days when the judges ruled, heard that already. Sorry. There was a famine in the land. Heard that too. There was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. So we start off with this guy, Elimelech. There's the famine in the land, and he takes his family and he leaves. It says that he went to sojourn, just kind of a temporary leaving of Israel to Moab. We need to realize that Moab was historically an enemy of Israel. They were actually cursed by God because they, when Israel was in need, they came against Israel. They did not help. So Moab was not, a godly place. There was idolatry. There was, no worship of the true God there. And so this guy from Israel left Israel, where the inheritance was, where God had called his people to be, where they could worship God truly, where the priests were, where they could offer sacrifice and worship God in the way that he ordained it to be. And so we see Elimelech leaving God. Any semblance of what he could, worship of God or anything, he was leaving by going to Moab. And so it doesn't explicitly say that, but I think it would be hard to say that that's not him sinning and leaving God by going to Moab. And also just leaving the hand of the Lord being upon Israel. It was easier to go to Moab because there was provision there, and just not trust that the Lord would bring his faithful people through. I was thinking, how often can we, step out of the will of the Lord because it's difficult sometimes. Maybe we see there's a famine in the land. We see, it doesn't look like I'm going to be provided for, even though we are where God has called us, or where God has called us. It looks like there could be famine. There could be something that would, even keep us from providing for our family, or at least we think that. And so we can go to Moab in that sense. We can leave where God's called us, even planning to go for a short time, and as it says, though, that Elimelech ended up remaining in Moab. He stayed away from the land of the Lord and actually ended up dying there, so he never came back to Israel. And I just think, it's possible that we could be daunted by seeing a famine or seeing something that could almost that could scare us from into leaving where the Lord's called us, and that's what Elimelech did, and that's not what we're to do as believers, but we're to trust in the Lord. If we continue on, it says in verse 3, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So we have Naomi, her husband dies, and then her 2 sons marry these Moabite women, which, while not explicitly stated in the law that they weren't to marry Moabites, it's again not something that really it was questionable at best if that was acceptable, especially Moab again being an enemy of Israel, and so this wasn't necessarily a good thing for them to do, but they lived there, and then Mahlon and Chilion died, and you really could see this as God's judgment being upon Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion, and whether or not it was the will of God, as we'll read through the rest of the story. God has his plan, and he has his purpose, and it is good. And while it looks here for Naomi and Ruth and Orpah as well, but mainly Naomi and Ruth, while it looks very tragic and like the Lord's left them and really left them high and dry in this land alone, God does have a plan. Being without a husband in this time, it wasn't quite like it is today. It was pretty much there was no one to provide for you. It wasn't really like a woman could go out and get a job easily and make a living. And so Orpah, Ruth, and Naomi were alone. They were poor, and they were in poverty. And so it says in verse 6, then she, that's Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So here, Naomi hears that the Lord, is now bringing food back into Israel and meets his people, and she says, okay, let's go back to Israel. It's time. It's time to go back to the Lord. And so she takes Orpah and Ruth with her, and they get up and they're about to go. And when we read in verse 8, it says, but Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So Naomi on the way, probably, pretty early on, and they're going to Israel, Naomi kind of stops and says, listen, guys, the Lord has come against me. The Lord's, taken my husband and my 2 sons, and, we're all 3 in a very bad state. But I'm going to go back to Israel. You guys go back to your house. Go back to your mother's house where you can be provided for by your father. Your mother can help prepare you to get married again. You guys have your life ahead of you, and you have a kind of a way out of this poverty and this hardship. Go take it. She was releasing them in a sense because they were, and to some extent, obligated, to follow her and to stay with her, and so she's releasing them from that obligation. And we continue on in verse 9. It says, this Naomi continued to speak to them, and she says, the Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. Again, that you guys would be able to get remarried and find rest. And she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices, and they wept. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. Here, showing emotion, showing love, a love, between the 3 of them. And they say, we'll return to your people. Note, return to your people. We'll return with you to your people. Just take note of that. It says, but Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? It's a rhetorical question. What do I have to offer you? I have nothing. I have no sons, as she'll say. She continues on, have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I'm too old to have a husband. And if I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. She loves Ruth and Orpah, and she says it's bitter for me for your sake that the Lord has done this, that I have no sons, because now you are in the same boat that I am, in having no husband to care for you and no one to provide for you. Go back to your homes, turn back. And it says in verse 14, they lifted up their voices and they wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law in farewell. And it says, but Ruth clung to her. So we see a difference between Orpah and Ruth. Ruth clings to Naomi, and Naomi says to her, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. She's gone back to everything she knows. Note how she talks about going back to her gods. And Ruth says, do not urge me to leave you or refrain from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. So that's, step up from will go with you to your people. It's your people will be my people. I'm going to commit myself to you and to your people. And she says, and your God, my God. She's going to commit to the Lord. Where you die, I will die, and there my people shall be, there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. We see Ruth here committing herself to Naomi out of love. There's nothing that Naomi has to offer to Ruth. She has nothing to offer. And we see the selfless love, a love of only from God, that she would follow with, to care for Naomi and to show love for Naomi. She shows commitment. And she says, that your God will be my God. And she says, may the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And so she makes that, commitment to the Lord. She says, may the Lord do to me and more also. So we have a statement of faith. She is giving herself to the Lord. She's coming to God. And so she's following Naomi out of her love for Naomi and out of her desire for God, for the true God, which is just a beautiful thing, because at this time, how many Israelites had that much faith and actually were committing themselves to the Lord. We read in verse 19, so the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem, and when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred up or excited because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? So they were like, Naomi's back. It's been 10 years they've been in this land, and finally, they see Naomi, and how wonderful it is to see someone after a long time of being away. And so they welcome her back, and they're excited. And she says to them, don't call me Naomi. Naomi means pleasant. She says, call me Mara. Mara means bitter. She says, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me pleasant? Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? And we see a bitterness in Naomi, a very self-focused. What has happened to me? What I can see, and what I can see is that God has harmed me. His hand has come against me. He's testified against me and brought calamity upon me. And she has a very narrow kind of focus and sight of what and who God is, what he's done and who he is. And so she says, call me bitter, because I'm bitter at God. And, if she could read chapters 2 and 3 and 4, she wouldn't say that. But at this point, she doesn't know what God's doing. And how often do we not know what God's doing, and we can get bitter, we can get upset with God and say, God, what are you doing? To her, it was her whole family. It was literally, her life was taken away from her, and there was no prospect for her. There was no hope for her. And I don't think any of us have been to that place. And yet we can still be bitter to the Lord. We can still be upset at what he's doing. And it pales in comparison of the death of her entire family, leaving her, helpless and hopeless. And so we will see, we see her attitude change, but right now she's struggling. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Sorry, that was loud. Chapter 2. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And just realize this is kind of separate from, this is just hey, this is kind of what's going on. It's a context. It doesn't run into verse 2. It says, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor, or the one in whose sight I shall find favor. ESV makes it sound like she's specifically talking about Boaz, but she's not, and it kind of messes with the story if you think she is. And she said to her, that's Naomi talking to Ruth, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the clan of Elimelech. And so we have here, Ruth goes out to glean, and if you don't know what gleaning is, it's the provision that the Lord established in Israel that, he established that gleaning could occur. So in Israel, when someone was harvesting, you could harvest one time, whether it was fruit or whether it was of the grain or whatever. You could go out and you could harvest one time. You couldn't harvest multiple times. So if you went out and it was the grapes, you'd pick the ripe grapes, and then the underripe grapes would be left. And then when they were ripened, people could come through and glean and take those that were ripe. With the barley harvest and the wheat, the reapers would come through and they would swing and cut down the grain. And if any were cut but not fully cut, and they weren't fully detached, those got left there that the people that were gleaning could come through. If any missed the blade, the gleaners could pick those. Or if any fell on the ground, that they dropped, then the gleaners could come through and get those, and the corners of the fields were left. So it was provision for the people who were poor that they could have something to eat. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough, to sustain someone by hard work. And so Ruth is going out to glean, and she happens to be in the field of Boaz. It says, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? So he comes back and he gives a greeting, the Lord be with you. And his workers answered, the Lord bless you. And that shows, that Boaz was, a godly man. Here where there was, so much wickedness going on in Israel, and there's so much, leaving of God and worship of false idols, he sets a precedent in his field. He says, the Lord be with you. And even the fact that his workers would answer, and the Lord bless you. It shows that he's kind of poured into them to some extent, that he's cultivated a godliness among those around him. And so we see that Boaz is a godly man. And he says, whose young woman is this? Who's that? He took notice of Ruth. The name Ruth means beautiful, and so it would make sense that he would notice her. In verse 6, it says, and the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. And if the worker in the field saying she came in early morning, she came pretty early. So she's been there all day working hard. Just an example of how hard she's working to provide for herself and for Naomi. The servant also explains how she came with Naomi and showed dedication and love for Naomi, and how she left her people. And then she also, just in even asking, please let me glean. She didn't take it for granted. While it was the law that the Lord established, it wasn't necessarily that every master of a field adhered to that. And so she didn't just assume, but she asked if she could glean. And so you could see her character in that she wasn't assuming, and that she was a hard worker, and that she did so much out of love and care for Naomi. Verse 8, then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. And so here we see Boaz just a depth of kindness in these two things. He says, don't go to another field, stay in my field. I'll provide for you, in the sense I'll provide protection for you, and I will provide water for you. That was not a requirement in the law. They didn't have to provide water or provide protection, and yet Boaz shows this kindness to Ruth. And it says in verse 10, then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? Here we have a great demonstration of God's love for us. Ruth was a foreigner, historically, her people, enemies of Israel even, and yet Boaz is showing kindness. And it's not like tons and tons, but he's providing protection, and he offers her water, that she wouldn't have to go do that work. We'll see he even provides more. But even this little bit, she falls on her face and bows to the ground and says, why? And I think sometimes we can kind of take for granted God's love for us, even the love that he showed us before, we really were of his household, of the household of God. Here Naomi's just an enemy of him, in that sense. She's a foreigner at the best. And, when we were enemies of God, Romans 5:8, I'll just turn there. I can say it all day when I'm, going over my notes, but as soon as I'm up here, it's gone. You probably all know it. I know it, but I can't say it. Okay, Romans 5:8. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And God showed his love that while we were still sinners. We jump down to verse 10. It says, if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God. And so I think often we can forget where we were with the Lord before we knew him, his love for us. And even, that, the love of God being so great, and here the love of Boaz is just a little bit, and she falls on her face and bows to the ground. Do we remember the God's love for us and say, God, why? Why do you love me? Who am I that you would love me? An enemy, much more of an enemy, much more of a foreigner than, Ruth was to Boaz. Was I to you, God? But yet God loved us, and God showed us his love. Verse 11, but Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. And, we as believers are called to leave our father and mother, to leave the land that we knew before. Everything, everything that is, against Christ, everything that in our life had been built up, that, the things that we loved and that we gave ourselves to, we're called to leave everything for Christ. And that's what Ruth did to come to the God of Israel as she followed Naomi in love and came to the God of Israel. She left everything, even leaving the land that she knew. And Boaz said, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, for the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And here Boaz blesses her, and he says, you've come to take refuge under the wings of God. The analogy being of a mother hen caring for her chicks, keeping them out of the elements, keeping them warm, keeping them dry and protected. And that is the analogy that he gives as he says, you've come under the wings of the Lord to take refuge. And then she said, I found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. It's not dreadfully hard to just, be kind, to show love to someone. And how often do people need just a little bit of love, and kindness? Boaz didn't show, he didn't give up like a lot just to provide for her in those two ways and to show love to her in that way, and then to give a kind word. It didn't take a lot. And how often, are the people in this world that we come in contact with, are they in desperate need of just a little comfort, of some love and kindness? And so here we see Ruth, she's comforted by that. It says in verse 14, and at mealtime Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. He's taken notice of her. He's seen godly character in her. He sees that she's kind, and he wants to provide for her and give to her, more than just the standard would be, and more than normally would happen. And so he says, come eat with me, and he gives her food. It says, so she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. And she keeps this leftovers to give to Naomi later. And it says, when she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves. Even what you haven't harvested yet, let her glean. If she strays over there, that's okay. He says, don't reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean, and don't rebuke her. Drop some here and there, and don't rebuke her. He's giving from his harvest to provide for her. And we can see, and in just like two more verses, we'll see how much, his servants did drop, and how much they took that to heart, what he said. It says in verse 17, so she gleaned in the field until evening. So she was there all day, from early morning to evening, working in the field. And then she beat out what she had gleaned. And it was about an ephah of barley. An ephah of barley would be about 35 to 50 pounds. So there was a lot of, dropping of sheaves and letting her stray into the unharvested area. Whatever the case is, Boaz blessed her greatly and made sure she was well provided for. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. She knows it's not just that Ruth is an extraordinary gleaner. She knows, there's something going on, and somebody took notice of her. It says, so Ruth, so she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and she said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers, a close of kin, someone who could redeem them, and we'll get to that. But that's the word for redeemer is also the same word that would just be a close of kin. Verse 21, and Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. So keep close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning, I lost my place. It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So here, Ruth says, Boaz told me to keep close to his men and to not leave his field, and Naomi says, perfect, that's great, don't leave. His field is safe. If you even leave his field, there's a chance that you could be assaulted. So even in this brief, kind of on the peripheral, we see that the rest of Israel still is wicked, and that someone who would be poor and trying to just glean could be assaulted in a field is a horrible thing. And so we do see that Boaz is showing godly character, even by just allowing gleaning, and so much more that he shows kindness in to those around him. And so she stays in Boaz's field, and I couldn't help but think that in this story, Boaz often being a representation of the love of God, how God calls us to be in a certain place. He says, stay here with me. This is what I'm doing. This is my plan for you. And we say, okay, yeah, and he provides for us. And then sometimes we see another field. We see something else that's not what the Lord has called us to, or it's not where he's leading us, and we say, oh, well, I want to do that. I want to go to that field. And the Lord promises protection and provision when we stay in his field, when we stay where he's called us. But when we go out and chase other things, he doesn't promise provision. He doesn't promise protection. And that's just something that I think the Lord put on my heart is, we should be staying in the field, not straying off to other fields where there's not protection, but staying where there's protection, where there's provision. Chapter 3, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, this is after the harvest, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you?" Again, Naomi's seeking rest for Ruth. Originally when she was sending Ruth and Orpah away, she was seeking rest for them, that they would, have a husband to care for them, and not that they would have nothing to do and be lazy, but that they would be provided for, and that they could live a life where their basic needs are sure and met, that it may be well with you. Is not Boaz our relative with whose young men you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, "All that you say I will do." So right here is kind of, Naomi is not playing matchmaker. She's not just, trying to kind of meddle and put these two together. But she sees that there's something between Boaz and Ruth. And so she says to Ruth, hey, go wash up, put on your perfume, and go down. And what she tells Ruth to do is, to some extent, ask that Boaz would marry her, that he would provide for her. And that's to see if Boaz would, if he would do that, because Naomi wants Ruth to be cared for. And so she's not trying to meddle, but she's not entirely sure if Boaz would or not, but it seems that he would be interested in Ruth. And so she tells Ruth to make that move. Verse 6 about Ruth. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. The men would sleep by the grain before it was, put into the barns or wherever they stored it after they, harvested and stuff, so that nobody could steal it during the night. And so he laid down by the heap of grain. It says, then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay at his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman was at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And here she says, I'm Ruth, spread your wings over your servant. It's the same, illustration that Boaz shared of Ruth coming under the wings of God to take refuge, and she asks him if he would be the physical, representation, or the physical way that God would actually provide for her and care for her. And so that's what she's asking of him. And she says, "You are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter, for you have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." There were plenty of other guys that Ruth could have gone after, not godly men, but men that would, be young and seem fun or whatever. But she hasn't gone after the other things, just like we're not to go after the other things. We're supposed to seek the Lord. And so that's, in seeking Boaz, Ruth is seeking a proper way to fulfill, to be provided for by a man, but a man that can redeem her. And so she's seeking to do it in the way that God's ordained that she would be redeemed and married. And so he says, "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." So she asks that he would redeem her, and he says, "I will do all that you ask." We'll get a little more into it, but the need of redemption was, there's the land and all of Elimelech's things needed to be redeemed. There's a price that needed to be paid for his land, and lumped into that was that Ruth would be a part of that, and she would be purchased and then redeemed, and then she could be married. And in the same way, we as humans were dead in the trespasses and sins in which we once walked. We needed to be redeemed. We were, Ephesians 2 says that we were following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. And we were dead. We needed to be redeemed. We needed to be bought before we could have any relationship with the Lord. And so Ruth here says, "Will you redeem me? And then will you marry me? Will you be my provision? You will be my provider." And he says, "I'll do for you all that you ask." In the same way, we need a redeemer, and that's Jesus, right? And Jesus came, and he with his blood paid for the sins of the world. With his blood, he redeemed us. Whoever would come to him, right? John 3:16. Whoever believes in him would have eternal life, would have that relationship with God. But the difference here is that we didn't even ask. We had a need, but God, we didn't say, "Hey God, will you be my redeemer?" We were enemies of God when he sent his son. And here Boaz says, "All that you ask, I will do for you all that you ask." We ask God, like the prodigal son, just to be a servant in his house would be enough for us. We love him. We see who God is, and just to be provided for would be certainly enough. And he says, "No, I'm going to make you heirs with Christ." He does more than we ask of our God. He gives to us in such a great way, and he shows his love with such depth. And so Boaz, if we get back in, says in verse 12, "And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he's not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning." And so he gives that promise that he will redeem her if this other will not. And just from the how the story's been progressing, we know that his heart and his desire is to redeem and be the redeemer and to marry Ruth. So she lay at his feet until morning, but arose before anyone could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." He's, caring for her reputation. He doesn't want anyone to get the wrong idea, seeing her leave the threshing floor, and at night. And so he says, "Let it not be known that she was here." And he said, "Bring the garment that you're wearing and hold it out." So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did it fare, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" And here we see, he recognized that Naomi was kind of an active part in Ruth coming and asking him this. And so he sends this barley back to Naomi, I believe, to kind of as a, I see what you've done, and kind of this is a good thing. And so Naomi replies, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. You know, the love of, Boaz's love, to some extent, is Ruth, and he wants her to be redeemed. And it is important to him, and he's not going to rest until the matter is solved. In the same way, for some reason, God loves us. Not that we have anything to offer him, but he wouldn't let it be that there was no Redeemer for us. He wouldn't let it be that we couldn't be with him. He settled the matter by his son Jesus, and even the fact that a Redeemer had to be a close relative, and Jesus had to come as a man to be a close relative of us so that he could pay the price, which was his blood, and redeem us to God. And so that's the love of our God. Now Boaz had gone up, chapter 4, he'd gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling a parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know. For there's no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I'll redeem it." The guy's like, "Yeah, I'll buy this piece of land, sure. More land and more inheritance for my kids, what's to lose out on, So he says he'll redeem it. And then Boaz said, just one little thing to add to this. The day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. So part of that, redemption, and Ruth was that in Israel, if a man had a wife and he died, that his next of kin was to marry that woman. If she was a widow without having a child, that the next of kin was to marry her and raise up a child for her, and then that child, the name would continue of his brother, the original husband of the wife. His name would continue so that a name would not die out in Israel, and also so that woman was provided for by having a husband and an heir. And so when this Redeemer hears that there's an attachment to this field, there's a woman that he have to marry and have a child with, and add to his inheritance, he says, the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." He says he cannot redeem it. He was not willing to redeem it because he had an inheritance for his kids. He had a wife. And so if he, added somebody to his family and had another child, and it would be a mess to him. And he didn't want, he did not want Ruth. It was not worth it to him. He wanted the field, but bringing Ruth into the matter, he said, "No, forget it. You can redeem her." For Boaz, it was about Ruth. It wasn't about the field. Boaz wanted to redeem Ruth, and the field was just something that came along with the redemption. And he had plenty of field. We read Matthew 13:44, how there was the man, the parable, very short parable, I think it's one verse, the man who found treasure in a field, and he buried it, and he sold everything that he had, and then he takes all that he has, and with joy he buys the field because of the treasure that's in it. This is a great representation of Boaz's heart here. He buys the field not because of the field, not because of really anything else other than the fact that Ruth comes with the field and he loves her. Think of Jesus, who paid the price for the whole world, but it was for his bride, right? Hebrews 12:2. I think I got this one. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. It was Jesus had joy in the purchase of his bride. That was the joy that he went to the cross for. It says he endured the cross, despising the shame, and it was for the joy set before him. It was for the joy of his bride, for the joy of bringing us to him, to bringing every believer, in history past to present to the future, that they would come to him and he would have, his bride. He would have his people, and that we wouldn't be separated from God. And that was the joy. It wasn't the joy of being, named the Lamb who was slain, or being able to return to the Father. The whole purpose, that the reason he came to the earth was that he would buy us to, back, that he would redeem us to God. And that was the joy that he looked at when he endured the cross. And so the Boaz purchasing Ruth is a pale picture of the depth of the love that God has for us. Verse 7, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders of all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon, and also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. And so Boaz purchases Ruth. It says, then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make this woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give to you by this woman. And this blessing doesn't even, they said, may your offspring be as Perez. And how much greater was the offspring of Boaz, being, as we'll read, the child's name is Obed. Obed being the grandfather of David the king, and also of the lineage of Jesus Christ. Verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went in to her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. And then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. We see God's provision, not only for Ruth, but for Naomi, that God gave her provision by Boaz to provide. She wasn't now alone. And then the fact that even God gave her a child, a grandson through Ruth. And not only just, a grandson, but Ruth, a daughter-in-law that was worth more than 7 sons. The Lord blessed Naomi and he blessed Ruth. And while they didn't see it at the beginning, and even then they didn't realize the depth of what God was doing through them, that the Lord was bringing an heir to the throne and ultimately using them in the lineage of Jesus Christ. The Lord blessed them. And we'll finish off with verse 18. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. And real quick before we finish, and the worship team can come up, I want to read Revelation chapter 5, starting in verse 8. You don't have to turn there if you don't want to. It's very brief. This is taking place in heaven. This is Jesus taking the scroll that only he was worthy to take out of every living thing in the entire universe. And it says, when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures And the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God, from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth." What Jesus gave for us is just to redeem us and to make us his people by his very own blood. What a love and what a gift.